March the 3rd, 1943. The waters of the Bismarck Sea rolled beneath a sky filled with smoke and flame. Oil slicks stretched for miles, dotted with burning wreckage. Thousands of men, soldiers of the Japanese 51st Division, clung desperately to planks, rafts, or nothing at all. They had set sail only days before, believing they would reinforce the garrison at Ley in New Guinea. Now they were broken survivors, watching American bombers circle back overhead. The disaster had begun months earlier. In December 1942, Japan's high command approved a bold plan: move an entire division from Rabaul to New Guinea by sea. 8 transports, escorted by 8 destroyers, would carry nearly 7,000 men. Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura took command, flying his flag aboard the destroyer Shirayuki. He knew the risks, but the Japanese believed their convoy would make it through. What they did not know was that the Allies were waiting. American codebreakers had already read their signals. Every detail of the voyage, routes, destinations, even the expected arrival date, was in Allied hands. At Port Moresby, General George Kenney had been training his air crews for this exact moment. His men had perfected a daring new method of attack: skip bombing. Modified B-25 bombers, bristling with heavy machine guns, would drop bombs that skipped across the sea like stones, smashing into ships at point-blank range. On March 1st, as the Japanese convoy sailed past New Britain, an American B-24 spotted them. The trap was sprung. That afternoon, nearly 30 B-17 Flying Fortresses thundered overhead. Bombs rained down. One transport, Kyokusei Maru, carrying more than 1,000 troops and barrels of aviation fuel, exploded in a massive fireball and disappeared beneath the waves. Destroyers rushed to rescue survivors, but in doing so, they slowed the entire convoy. 2 days later came the decisive blow. The morning of March 3rd dawned clear. At 10 o'clock, B-17s once again appeared at high altitude, forcing Japanese eyes skyward. Then from the horizon came the roar of engines flying barely above the waves. 13 Australian Beaufighters swept in first, strafing the decks with cannons and heavy guns. Chaos erupted as anti-aircraft batteries were torn apart. Behind them, the American B-25 stormed in, flying so low their propellers whipped the sea into white spray. Bombs skipped across the surface, slamming into transports at the waterline. One ship after another was struck, engulfed in explosions. In just 15 minutes, the convoy was shattered. All 7 remaining transports were burning, sinking, or dead in the water. Admiral Kimura's flagship Shirayuki took a direct hit and vanished in a single fiery blast. The sea was now a graveyard of ships, oil fires, and drowning men. The ordeal was not over. As afternoon came, Allied aircraft returned. Survivors at first thought the planes were photographing the wreckage, but relief turned to horror as the aircraft dropped low, guns blazing. Lifeboats and rafts were riddled with bullets. Men in the water were pursued by strafing runs. From the American point of view, no soldier was to reach New Guinea alive. From the Japanese perspective, it was a nightmare beyond comprehension, an attack upon men already helpless. When night fell, American PT boats prowled the wreckage, firing on anything that moved. Sharks followed, drawn by blood. Screams cut through the darkness as men who had survived the bombings and strafing were dragged under. By dawn on March 4th, the scale of the disaster was undeniable. Wreckage stretched for 40 miles. Thousands remained adrift. Even rescue ships were hunted. Destroyer Asashio, trying to save men from the crippled Arashio, was struck by a bomb and sank, taking hundreds down with her. By the end of that day, the Japanese convoy no longer existed. 8 transports and 4 destroyers had been destroyed. More than 3,000 men were dead. Allied losses were barely a handful of planes. For those who survived, the memory was worse than defeat. It was the shattering of everything they had believed about honor and war. The Bismarck Sea was silent now, but beneath the calm rolled the echoes of slaughter. 8 transports and 4 destroyers lay at the bottom. The surface still shimmered with oil and wreckage, and among it drifted thousands of Japanese soldiers, men who only days earlier had set out to reinforce Ley. Now they clung to rafts, to planks, or to nothing at all. For them, survival was a cruel illusion. Allied aircraft swept the sea again and again, their guns tearing through lifeboats and rafts. Rescue efforts were hunted. The destroyer Asashio, trying desperately to save men, was struck and blown apart. Survivors screamed as they slipped beneath burning waves or were dragged under by the sharks drawn to the carnage. Japanese submarines tried to help. They crept in under cover of night, rescuing the lucky few they could reach. But the ocean was vast, and there were too many voices calling for salvation. Some men were pulled aboard, blackened with oil, delirious from thirst. Others were left behind, their cries fading into the darkness. For those who lived through it, the worst memory was not the bombing, it was what followed. They had been raised on Bushido, taught to fight with honor and respect. But the strafing of helpless men burned away those illusions. To the survivors, the enemy now seemed merciless, beyond human. The experience would scar them forever. The Allies called it strategy. Every soldier left alive was one more rifle waiting in New Guinea. For the air crews who flew those missions, it was also revenge. They remembered the cruelty of Bataan, the fate of captured comrades, the Zero pilots who had gunned down parachuting airmen. To them, this was justice returned. To the Japanese, it was horror without end. Some men managed to reach the islands scattered across the sea. They staggered ashore, starving and wounded, only to face Australian patrols. On Goodenough Island, dozens were hunted down. On Kiriwina, PT boats intercepted survivors. Even those who thought they had escaped soon found themselves surrounded, prisoners of war or corpses in the jungle. In the end, of the nearly 7,000 men who set sail, more than 3,000 were dead. Barely 1,200 reached Leh. Japan had lost not just ships and soldiers, but the ability to reinforce its armies by sea. Never again would they risk large convoys in waters within Allied air range. New Guinea was left to wither, cut off from hope. The psychological impact was just as devastating. Survivors spoke of Americans as demons, men who showed no mercy. Across the Pacific, Japanese soldiers heard their stories, and one belief took root: surrender meant death. From then on, countless units would fight to the last man rather than risk capture. For the Allies, it was proof of a new kind of warfare. Skip bombing had worked. Air power alone had destroyed a fleet. Intelligence had set the trap, innovation had sprung it, and ruthless execution had finished it. The numbers told the story. 8 transports sunk, 4 destroyers gone, over 3,000 Japanese killed, Allied losses, 4 aircraft, a ratio so lopsided it seemed unbelievable. But it was real, and it marked a turning point. The waters of the Bismarck Sea eventually grew quiet again. The oil slicks thinned, the bodies sank, and the wreckage drifted away. Nothing remained but silence. Yet the memory endured, in the fear of Japanese troops who now believed capture was worse than death, and in the confidence of Allied airmen who knew the skies had become their battlefield. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was not just a victory. It was a warning of the future. A future where wars would be fought with intelligence, innovation, and a level of ruthlessness that left no room for mercy.